My brother and his wife left me without a seat at their fancy dinner, telling me to go to McDonald's. They had no idea I, the family janitor, secretly owned the restaurant and their entire lives. You don't belong here, my brother sneered at dinner, so I laughed, bought the $5 million restaurant, fired him, and took back everything. My name is Ethan Cole, I am 38 years old, and my own family left me standing without a seat at their fancy dinner party, telling me I should probably go eat at McDonald's. Before I tell you how I ended up owning that restaurant, the company my brother worked for, and the exact building they resided in, please let me know where you're viewing from in the comments section. It's important to know who you're talking to. All of this took place at the Summit in Chicago. If you're from around here, you'll recognize the name. It's one of those five-star establishments where politicians strike agreements over steak and celebrities hide from the cameras in private rooms. Reservations must be made months, sometimes a year, in advance. So I was shocked when my brother, Nathan, called to invite me to a dinner to celebrate his promotion to vice president. Nathan and his wife, Rebecca, had spent years keeping me at a distance. I was the awkward older brother, the blue-collar black sheep, the janitor. I didn't fit into their new, refined lifestyle. So, being invited to the city's most exclusive restaurant, something felt odd. But a small part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, thought it might be a peace offering. Perhaps they were finally ready to be a family again. I put on my nicest suit. It was old and slightly worn at the elbows, but it was clean and the best I had. I drove my old pickup truck, the one with a constant layer of filth and a dent in the driver's side door, and handed over the keys to the valet, who looked at me as if I had just arrived from another planet. I walked inside. The restaurant was dripping with crystal chandeliers, soft classical music, and servers who moved like ghosts. I noticed them across the room. Nathan, looking sharp in a suit that probably cost more than my truck, and Rebecca, sparkling in a designer dress and what looked like real diamonds. They sat at a large table with some important-looking folks, but as I came closer, a chill ran up my spine. There were 10 chairs around the table. 10 people sat in them. There were no unoccupied seats. I stood at the edge of their circle of laughter and clinking glasses, an invisible ghost in a threadbare suit. Nathan eventually looked up, a slow, smug smile creeping across his face. The entire table fell silent, their eyes following his to land on me. Then, with a voice as sweet as poison, Rebecca leaned forward and said, loud enough for the tables around to hear, "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. There must have been a mix-up. But you know, maybe McDonald's would be better suited for someone of your background." The hush in that section of the restaurant was deafening. Every eye was on me. They were waiting for me to shatter, to yell, to flee in disgrace. Instead, I started laughing. It began quietly, a rumble in my chest, and gradually grew louder until it was a roar that echoed through the entire establishment. It was not a madman's laugh. It was the laugh of a man who held all the cards. Nathan's smile vanished. Rebecca's face went pale. And that was when the real show started. To understand that night, you have to understand the 25 years that came before it. You have to understand Sarah. The life I was supposed to have, the one where I was just a normal kid, ended when I was 13. We were a typical family. Mom, Dad, me, 5-year-old Nathan, and Sarah, who had just turned 2. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. We lived in a small house with a yard and had family dinners every night. Then came the phone call. A rainy night, a winding road, and a drunk driver crossing the center line. My parents' car was struck head-on. The accident was horrific. Just like that, I was no longer a child. I was an orphan and the guardian of 2 younger siblings. The world suddenly became very cold and very harsh. The life insurance payout was barely enough to keep the house. I dropped out of school. My childhood was over. My new life was a blur of juggling the roles of father, mother, and provider. I learned to cook, clean, change diapers, and help with homework I didn't understand myself. Nathan was young enough to adapt. He was a kid who just needed food and a warm bed. But Sarah was fragile. She was a sweet, gentle little girl with big, curious eyes. When she was 4, she got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever. The doctor said it was pneumonia, a bad case. He said she needed to be in a hospital, on special antibiotics, with round-the-clock care. I took her to the public hospital, the only place we could afford. The place was chaos. People were groaning on gurneys in the hallways. The smell of antiseptic and hopelessness hung heavy in the air. We waited for hours, Sarah's little body burning with fever in my arms, her breathing shallow. I begged the nurses, the receptionists, anyone who would listen. They all gave me the same tired look. We'll get to you when we can. Everyone here is sick. While we waited, I saw wealthy people entering through a different door. They were led immediately to private rooms, doctors rushing to their side. Their money bought them a fast pass through the queue of misery. By the time we finally got a bed in a crowded ward, it was too late. The infection had moved too fast. I watched my little sister die in my arms. Her last breath was a tiny, shuddering gasp. The world went silent. I held her lifeless body in the middle of all that hospital noise, but all I could hear was the roaring failure of my own powerlessness. I had failed her. Money, or the lack of it, had killed her. That night, clutching her favorite worn-out teddy bear, I made a promise. It was a blood oath, whispered into the darkness of our small, quiet house. I swore that Nathan would never know that kind of pain, that we would never be denied anything because we didn't have enough. I would build a wall of money around him so high that no hardship could ever touch him. I would sacrifice everything to give him the life that had been stolen from us. And so, I did. For the next 25 years, my life wasn't my own. It belonged to Nathan. I worked 3, sometimes 4, jobs simultaneously. By day, I was a janitor, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors in office buildings. The smell of bleach became my cologne. At dusk, I'd clock out and head to a construction site, where I'd break my back hauling drywall and mixing cement until my muscles screamed in protest. My nights were spent as a security guard, watching over deserted buildings, the only sound the turning of pages. I used the long, silent hours to educate myself. I devoured every book I could find on business, finance, and investment theory. For decades, I slept maybe 3 hours a night. My hands became permanently calloused, a roadmap of scars and sores. Every dollar I made, every single cent that didn't go to bread and rent, went to Nathan. He went to the best private schools while I ate ramen noodles over a sink. He made the football team, so I bought him the best equipment. When he turned 16, I bought him his first car, not a beater like my pickup, but a brand new, premium sedan. I wanted him to have what the other kids had. I wanted him to feel pride, not shame. I paid for him to go to a top-tier business school. The tuition was astronomical. I took on extra shifts, sold what little of value we had left from our parents. He never asked where the money came from. He just took it. When he graduated, I paid the entire down payment on his penthouse apartment in a new downtown high-rise. And when he met Rebecca, the daughter of a bank executive, I funded their lavish $250,000 wedding. I stood in the back, in my ill-fitting rental suit, watching my brother marry into a world I had built for him but could never be a part of. He was living the dream I had forged for him on the anvil of my own life. But here's the part no one knew. Here's the secret I kept for 15 years. Around the time Nathan started college, I began investing what little I had managed to scrape together, a few $1,000s. I used what I learned during those lonely nights watching empty warehouses. My first investments were small, risky. But my theories, born from a desperate kind of logic, paid off. Then they paid off again. I had a knack for seeing patterns others missed. I reinvested every cent. While I was still cleaning toilets by day, my secret portfolio was growing. First to 10,000, then 100,000, then a million. It became a silent, roaring engine in the background of my life. I started buying businesses. A small catering company. A commercial cleaning firm. Then bigger things. Real estate. Tech startups. And 15 years ago, I bought the Summit. I bought the entire parent company that owned the restaurant, along with a portfolio of other high-end hospitality brands. It was now just one small part of my empire, an empire worth, on the night of that dinner, more than $78 million. But I never changed my life. I intentionally kept my janitor job, or at least, the appearance of it. I kept the old truck. I wore the second-hand clothes. I lived in the same small, cheap apartment. It became a test. A social experiment. I wanted to see who would respect Ethan Cole, the man, when they thought he had nothing. Who would be kind to the janitor? Who would look past the dirt under my fingernails? The answer was almost no one. Certainly not Nathan or Rebecca. As Nathan climbed the corporate ladder, a ladder I had secretly built and steadied for him through anonymous, strategic investments in his company, he and his wife began to slowly, methodically, excise me from their lives. The invitations to Thanksgiving stopped. They were always traveling. Christmas became a card with a gift certificate inside. When his banking colleagues were around, they'd make excuses. My brother's a very private person, they'd say. I was their dirty little secret. The one person I could truly trust was Robert, the manager at the Summit. He knew the truth. I'd met Robert years ago when he was a down-on-his-luck security guard at another building I was watching. He'd lost his job, his wife was sick, and he was sleeping in his car. I shared my dinner with him and gave him a few $100s to help him get back on his feet. Later, when I had the means, I hired him. His loyalty was to Ethan Cole, the man who shared his sandwich, not the millionaire who signed his paychecks. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place about 3 months before that fateful dinner. The cleaning company I worked for was bought by a larger corporation, and my position was eliminated. For the first time in decades, I was unemployed. I decided to conduct one last test. I called Nathan. I put on my most defeated voice. I told him I'd lost my job, that I was a few hundred short on rent. I asked if I could borrow a little to get by. The silence on the other end of the line was chilling. "Ethan," he said finally, his voice tight with irritation, "we can't. Things are tight right now." Tight. He was making $800,000 a year. "Maybe you should look into some government assistance programs," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. A few days later, a package arrived. It was a gift from Nathan and Rebecca, an expensive-looking, modern desk clock. The note read, "Thinking of you in this difficult time. Hope this brightens up your apartment." It was a bizarre, impersonal gift, but on a hunch, I took it to an expert. Deep inside the clock's mechanism, hidden with professional skill, was a high-end, voice-activated listening device. They weren't just thinking of me. They were spying on me. A dark, ugly suspicion began to form. So, I placed the clock on my mantle and let it record. I talked to myself about my situation, about feeling lost and hopeless. I was performing for an audience of 2. A week later, Nathan called with the invitation to the summit. "We want to celebrate my promotion, Ethan," he said, his voice slick with fake warmth. "And we want you to be there. It's time we put the past behind us." I knew it was a lie. I knew it was a trap. But I agreed, because I knew it was time for the charade to end. The weeks leading up to the dinner felt like the quiet before a hurricane. On the surface, nothing had changed, but underneath, the pressure was building, and for once, I was the one with my hand on the valve. My first call after accepting Nathan's invitation wasn't to a suit rental shop. It was to my real office, the secure, private suite downtown that Nathan had no idea existed. I buzzed Jessica, my head of PR. She was brilliant, ruthless, and fiercely loyal. "Jessica," I said, "I'm attending a dinner in 3 weeks at the summit. My brother's party. I want a full media package ready to deploy on my signal. Audio files, financial statements, a complete narrative. I want it leaked to the most aggressive online news outlet you know. I want it to go viral." There was a pause. "Ethan, what's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "The test is over," I said. "It's time to collect the data." She didn't need me to say more. She knew my story. She just said, "Consider it done." Then, I turned my attention to the desk clock, the ugly, expensive gift from Nathan and Rebecca. I had been careful, feeding it a narrative of a man on the verge of collapse. I talked openly about my financial struggles, my loneliness, my failing health. I wanted to see just how far they would go. I had the bug retrieved from the clock and sat in my office, headphones on, listening to the recordings it had made from their opulent home. The audio quality was crystal clear. I heard them discussing me. "He's becoming a liability," Nathan said, his voice tinged with annoyance. "He called asking for money again. What if one of my partners sees him? What if he shows up at the office?" Then came Rebecca's voice, cold as ice. "We need to handle this, Nathan. For good. My father has been asking questions. He says a man is judged by his family. We can't have a broke janitor dragging us down." My jaw tightened. I kept listening. "I've been looking into some places," Rebecca continued. "State-run facilities. There's one upstate. It's clean enough. If we can get him declared mentally incompetent, we can get power of attorney. We can sell his sad little apartment and use the money for his care. It would be a mercy, really. He's clearly unstable." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just shame. This was a premeditated plot. They were going to have me committed, declared insane, and seize the only home I had in the world, all to protect their social standing. They weren't just erasing me from their lives. They planned to lock me up and throw away the key. That was the moment any last, lingering ember of familial feeling I had for them was extinguished. This wasn't about a broken bond anymore. This was about survival. This was about justice. I saved the audio file. I emailed it to Jessica with one instruction: include this in the package. Title it The Mercy Plan. A few days later, I made one final test. I called Nathan again. Nathan, I began, my voice cracking slightly. I'm sorry to bother you again. I'm really in a bad spot. The unemployment hasn't come through. I might get evicted. The sigh on his end was heavy, theatrical. Ethan, I told you, we can't help. Rebecca and I have commitments. I know, I said. I feel so lost. Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I was feeding them the exact lines they wanted to hear. You need to get help, Ethan, he said, his voice taking on a tone of deep concern. But it was the concern of a predator, not a brother. Maybe talk to a professional. There are state services that can help people in your situation. Help? That's what they called it. Okay, Nathan, I said softly. I'll see you at dinner. Yes, he said, his voice brightening. It'll be great. A real celebration. I hung up the phone. The anger was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving something cold and hard in its place. The decision was made. I didn't spend the next weeks worrying about what to wear to the dinner. I spent it making 2 final calls. The first was to Robert at the summit. Robert, tonight's the night. I'll be arriving at 7. Treat me as you always have when I've come in the back, like a stranger. Until I give you the signal. What's the signal? He asked. You'll know it when you hear it, I assured him. And have my private dining room ready. The one with the conference call capabilities. And Robert, tip off a few of the paparazzi you know. Tell them a big scandal involving a banking VP is about to break at your restaurant. Don't mention my name. With pleasure, Mr. Cole, he said, his voice full of satisfaction. My last call was to Mr. Whitaker, the CEO of the parent investment group that controlled the bank where Nathan worked. Whitaker was an old-school executive I'd kept on when I bought the company, a man of integrity who reported directly to me. Martin, I said, I need you to do me a personal favor tonight. I need you to be at the summit at 7:30. Have dinner at the bar. At some point, I'll be sending you a text. When you receive it, I need you to walk over to my brother's table and say exactly what the text says. Can you do that for me? Ethan, is everything all right? He asked. Everything is about to be set right, I said. Just be there, Martin. I'll be there, he confirmed, no more questions asked. The stage was set. The actors were in position. The script was written. I just had one last stop to make. I drove to the cemetery, to my parents' graves, and to Sarah's small one beside them. It was a cold, gray afternoon. I didn't bring flowers. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, the wind whipping through my thin jacket. I wasn't the 13-year-old boy who stood here lost and afraid. I wasn't the broken man who watched his sister die. I had built the wall I promised, a fortress of wealth and power. And my brother, the person I built it all for, was on the other side, trying to tear me down. He thought I was a liability. He was about to learn I was the bank. I was the house. And the house always wins. I looked at Sarah's name, etched into the cold stone. Tonight, I said softly, this is for you. The drive to the summit was strangely calm. The city lights blurred past the windows of my old pickup, the engine rattling a familiar rhythm. For most people, a night like this would be filled with anxiety, but for me, it felt like a homecoming. Not to the restaurant, but to a point of absolute clarity. The years of duplicity, of living 2 lives, were about to come to an end. There was a strange peace in that. I pulled up to the valet, and the young man in the pristine red jacket looked at my truck, then at me, with a mixture of surprise and disdain. I have a reservation, I said quietly, handing him the keys. Under Cole. He smirked. Right. Just leave it here. I'll find a spot for it. When I walked through the heavy oak doors, the noise of the city fell away, replaced by the hushed tones of wealth. Robert, the manager, was at the host stand. He saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his professional mask slipped. I saw the recognition, the loyalty. Then, as planned, it was gone. His expression became a polite, neutral slate. My eyes swept the room and found them. Nathan's party. He was holding court, telling some story with grand gestures. Rebecca was laughing, her head thrown back, diamonds catching the light. They looked like an advertisement for success. As I approached, I watched Nathan's face. I saw the moment he noticed me. The smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance, before he replaced it with that smug, condescending grin. He was going to do it. He was going to humiliate me. I reached the table and stood there, waiting. He let the silence hang, savoring my discomfort. Then Rebecca delivered her line with surgical precision. Maybe McDonald's would be better suited for someone of your background. The subsequent silence was heavy, thick with cruel delight. I looked around the table, at the faces of pity and sadistic pleasure. Nathan looked triumphant. He thought he had one. And in that moment, all I could think of was Sarah. The feeling of being worthless, disposable, the very thing I had built an empire to avoid. My own brother was serving it to me on a silver platter. The pain was sharp. For a second, the 13-year-old boy wanted to run. But then, another thought pushed through. They don't know. They had no idea who they were talking to. The sheer, monumental irony of it was overwhelming. The absurdity was breathtaking. And that's when the laugh started. It wasn't a choice, it was a reflex. I threw my head back and roared. The sound shattered the restaurant's quiet hum. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Everyone turned to stare at the man in the shabby suit laughing like a king. I saw the confusion on Nathan's face turn to alarm. This wasn't the script. I let the laugh subside, wiping a tear from my eye. That's a good one, little brother, I said, my voice steady and clear. But I think I'll stay. In fact, I'm feeling like I need a bit more privacy. I looked past their stunned faces, my eyes meeting Robert's across the room. I gave him the slightest nod. It was time. Robert started walking toward us, not with the hurried pace of a manager dealing with a disturbance, but with the slow, reverent stride of a servant approaching his king. He stopped a few feet away, and then he did something that caused a ripple of gasps to spread through the room. He bowed. A deep, formal bow from the waist. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice ringing with a deference that was utterly at odds with my appearance. "My apologies for the wait. Your usual private dining room is ready, sir. Whenever you are." Nathan's face drained of all color. Rebecca's perfectly painted mouth fell open. What is this?" Nathan stammered, looking from me to Robert and back again. "What did you call him?" I turned to my brother, a slow smile spreading across my lips. "He called me by my name, Nathan. Mr. Cole. It's a name that carries a little more weight in this establishment than you seem to realize." I took a step toward the table, and the other guests flinched back in their chairs. "You see, Robert," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room, "I love what you've done with the place. The new lighting is a nice touch. The wine list is superb. I knew you were the right man for the job when I promoted you." Nathan's eyes were wide. "You promoted him?" "Of course," I said. "I own the place. The Summit, the entire hospitality group, actually. Bought it about 15 years ago. Been one of my more stable assets." A woman at the table made a small, strangled noise. Rebecca was just shaking her head, a short, jerky motion, as if she could physically deny what was happening. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. You're a janitor." I said pleasantly. "Among other things. It was good, honest work. It helped me pay for important things. Like Nathan's tuition, and his sedan, and the down payment on your penthouse, and this wedding." I ticked each item off on my fingers. "That was a hell of a bill, by the way. The $250,000 one." Nathan looked like he was going to be physically sick. But I wasn't finished. "But that's not all. I'm a believer in diversified portfolios. Hospitality is great, but real estate is solid. Which is why I also own the building you live in. All 50 floors of it. You're not just my brother, Nathan. You're my tenant." My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "The package is live." I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to Mr. Whitaker, who I could see sitting at the bar, nursing a scotch. "Martin, walk over. Say this, Nathan, we need to talk. Mr. Cole has shown me some disturbing information about your plan to seize his assets. Pack your desk. You're done." I hit send. "And then there's finance," I said, putting my phone away. "A tricky business, but very profitable if you own the whole game. For instance, if you happen to own the parent investment firm that owns the bank where a certain vice president thinks he's a big shot." As if on cue, Mr. Whitaker rose from the bar and started walking toward our table. His arrival transformed the scene from a family drama into a corporate execution. He stopped beside Nathan. "Nathan," he began, his voice firm. "We need to talk. Mr. Cole has shown me some disturbing information about your plan to seize his assets. Pack your desk. You're done." Just then, a new sound filled the room. A chorus of buzzes and beeps as the phones of other diners began to light up. A man's eyes widened as he read his screen. A woman gasped, showing her phone to her husband. The story was out. I pulled a small, high-quality speaker from my jacket pocket. "You know, Rebecca," I began, "when you talked about those state-run facilities, about having me declared mentally incompetent, you called it a mercy. I was so touched by your concern." I pressed play. Rebecca's own voice filled the dead-silent restaurant, captured in perfect clarity by the clock she had given me. "If we can get him declared mentally incompetent, We can get power of attorney. It would be a mercy. Really. Rebecca let out a choked shriek. Nathan just stared, his face a mask of utter ruin. Just then, the restaurant doors flew open, letting in a storm of flashing lights. The paparazzi had arrived. They swarmed forward, cameras clicking, capturing the image of the disgraced couple and the quiet, shabbily dressed man who had just dismantled their world. The fallout was spectacular. It wasn't just a local scandal, it was a global media event. The story, complete with the audio from the Mercy Plan, was everywhere. The hashtag billionaire janitor was trending worldwide. Celebrities and politicians I'd never heard of were weighing in, condemning Nathan and Rebecca. They had become the poster children for greed and ingratitude. The consequences for them were immediate and brutal. Nathan went to his office the next morning and was met by security in the lobby. He was handed a cardboard box with his personal effects. His career in finance was over. No reputable firm would touch him. Rebecca's world collapsed even faster. The charity board she sat on demanded her immediate resignation. The country club membership was revoked. Her so-called friends, the women she lunched with, suddenly didn't recognize her on the street. Her father, the banking CEO whose approval she craved, did what men like him always do. He cut his losses. He issued a public statement expressing his deep disappointment and announcing he was severing all ties with his daughter and son-in-law. To protect his own reputation, he threw them to the wolves. They were ruined socially, professionally, and financially. About a week later, they requested a meeting through my lawyers. I agreed, not out of pity, but because there were still loose ends. I met them in the small, bare apartment I'd lived in for 30 years, the one they had plotted to steal. "What do you want, Ethan?" Nathan finally asked, his voice a whisper. "Isn't it enough? You've destroyed us." I leaned forward. "Destroyed you?" "No, Nathan. I haven't destroyed you. I've simply collected a debt. The money you built your life on was mine. The reputation you enjoyed was bought with my sacrifice. I didn't destroy anything. I simply took back what was mine." Rebecca began to cry. "What are we supposed to do? We have nothing." "Nothing." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "You have your health. You have each other. That's more than Sarah had. You want to know what you do now? You get a job. A real one. You learn what it feels like to work for a living, to worry about rent, to earn your own dignity instead of riding on someone else's." I slid a folder across the table. "You'll sign away what little remains of your assets. In return, I agree not to press criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. After that, you're on your own. I'm taking down the wall I built around you. Welcome to the real world." They signed the papers and left. My part in their story was over, but a new part of my own was just beginning. I took the vast resources of my empire and created a foundation. I named it the Invisible Providers. Its mission was simple: to offer legal and financial aid to caregivers and family members who sacrifice everything and are left with nothing. It became my new purpose, my way of honoring Sarah and ensuring no one else ever felt the powerlessness I felt in that hospital hallway. The foundation created a national movement. I, Ethan Cole, the man who had lived in the shadows, finally stepped into the light. A year passed. I never heard from Nathan or Rebecca again. Then, one Tuesday, my life shifted once more. My foundation had a strict protocol I'd designed. Any case file with the last name Cole was flagged for my personal review. A file landed on my desk. The applicant was anonymous, applying for a grant through a hospital social worker. The funds were for a highly specialized, experimental pediatric surgery. The patient's name was Daniel Cole, age 5. The diagnosis made the air leave my lungs, a rare congenital heart defect, the exact same one Sarah was born with. It couldn't be a coincidence. My head of security, Frank, had the information for me in 2 days. He slid a single photograph onto my desk. It was a little boy with sandy brown hair and my father's eyes. Behind him, on a park bench, stood Nathan and Rebecca. They had a son, a 5-year-old son they had hidden from me, a 6th son. The betrayal was a physical blow, deeper and more venomous than the plot to have me committed. Why? Why hide a sick child from the one person on this earth who would have understood his struggle better than anyone? I drove to their new address myself. It was a small, run-down apartment in a town 2 hours away. Nathan opened the door. When he saw me, he looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Ethan," he breathed. I stepped inside. Rebecca was in the kitchen and froze. Then, the little boy from the photo emerged from a back room. "Mommy." he said, looking at me with big, curious eyes. Who is that? She gently steered him back to his room. We were ashamed, Rebecca finally whispered when she returned. Ashamed of what? Of having a child? Of having a sick child, she clarified, tears welling. When he was diagnosed, all I could think about was Sarah. We were afraid you'd hate us, that you'd see us as a burden. So we kept it a secret. Nathan finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was my fault, Ethan. I was a coward. After everything you did, I couldn't face another failure in your eyes. So I hid my own son from you. It was the most monstrous thing I've ever done. He finally broke, sinking into a chair and sobbing, not with self-pity, but with the full, crushing weight of his own moral bankruptcy. The anger in me subsided, replaced by a glimmer of understanding. He hadn't acted from malice, but from a deep, twisted shame. The cycle of pain that began with Sarah's death had to end here, with this child. The surgery, I said softly, it was successful? Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes. The doctors called it a miracle. An anonymous donor covered the entire cost. We never found out who. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I said, get your coats. The three of you. You don't live here anymore.